Greta discovered our fossil fuel reliance's hidden toll. Now, get ready for a thrilling modern transformation, small-scale ammonia and hydrogen solutions. This is the story of how factoring in life cycle emissions and social costs changes everything, and how new technology can reshape our entire energy future. The unseen costs exposed. We once believed fertilizer and fossil-based power came with only a few side effects, maybe a bad smell or higher monthly bills. Then Greta Thunberg grabbed the global microphone. Suddenly, society saw that pollution and social costs weren't just side notes. They were the entire subplot hiding behind our cheap fertilizer and fuel. When Greta discovered how coal, oil, and gas are linked to higher healthcare burdens and environmental damage, she joined voices like Greg Vezina, an outspoken ammonia advocate who's been waving a red flag, or rather, a bright green one, since the 1970s. Vezina, who famously showcased ammonia-fueled cars decades ago, warns that mainstream economics has missed the big picture. We pay far more than the price at the pump when we ignore greenhouse emissions, climate change, and community health impacts. In recent Facebook discussions, such as an illuminating post by Phil Room in Karachi, commentators highlight how these hidden costs don't only affect wealthy countries, they hammer developing nations too. The environment and public health take a beating long before local communities receive any tangible economic benefits from fossil-fueled industries. Traditionally, industries scored big by letting others foot the bill for their pollution. Some call these externalities, but the cost of ignoring them is ballooning, and we're all starting to notice. The rise of carbon taxes and stricter emission standards around the world can make dirty processes less attractive, and that's even before we talk about the moral imperative of leaving a healthy planet for our kids. Experts emphasize that every ton of ammonia made from coal or natural gas has a hidden social cost: greenhouse gases, particulate matter, and ocean acidification. These factors aren't typically on balance sheets, but once you calculate the damage, the total is downright scary. Picture a ledger that includes emergency room visits for asthma, climate adaptation costs from rising sea levels, and the price tags on extreme weather cleanups. Think it's cheap to keep shoveling carbon into the sky? Not if you're the one whose home floods every time a hurricane doubles in intensity. Greta might have gotten the world's attention with her fiery speeches, but ammonia pioneers like Vezina have been tinkering behind the scenes for years, demonstrating that we can ditch fossil fuels for local, zero-carbon solutions. The upshot is that the next wave of technologies, especially small-scale ammonia and hydrogen production systems, are coming to the rescue. By making it cheap and accessible to produce our own fertilizer, fuel, and power, these breakthroughs could rewrite the rules on how we grow food, run cars, and heat homes. Once we ditch our old accounting trick of ignoring externalities, the truth is clear. We've been overpaying for cheap energy all along. Whether you're scanning a witty post on Facebook or reading a sobering World Bank report, we can't afford to ignore these costs anymore. It's time for technology, activism, and good old-fashioned math to collide, and from that collision emerges a new era of human progress, one that's not shackled to fossil fuels. Technology, democracy, and the path to energy abundance. For much of modern history, a small club of countries with oil rigs and gas fields pretty much ran the world's energy scene. Everyone else had to import fossil fuels and pray the prices didn't spike. That dynamic not only fueled geopolitical strife, but also locked countless nations into a low rung on the economic ladder. Enter democracy, technology, and a dream of equality. A big part of this dream is seeing how technology can decentralize power, literally. If we can shift from a model where 13 countries provide 90% of the world's energy to one where 90% of the globe churns out its own, that's a revolution. Countries that used to spend fortunes importing diesel or natural gas might soon run solar farms to generate electricity or use micro-ammonia plants to create local fertilizer without the giant carbon footprint. Consider the basic idea of democracy itself. The power belongs to the people, right? Usually, we discuss political democracy in terms of votes and elections, but economic democracy is just as vital. If a population can control its own energy production, it's empowered to shape its destiny. Even if you're not building your own micro-ammonia unit in your backyard, though some folks do, community-level or city-level systems can drastically reduce reliance on external suppliers. In places like Karachi, entrepreneurs are discussing how small-scale ammonia production could revolutionize local industries. The conversation in that Facebook post by Phil Room took off because people recognized the immediate economic benefits. Why buy fertilizer at inflated prices when local production is feasible and cost-competitive, especially after factoring in carbon taxes or shipping costs? Why stick with polluting diesel generators when ammonia engines or fuel cells might power your microgrid? But democracy in energy means more than just cheaper bills. It's about bridging the gap between so-called first world and third world countries. Under standard economics, once a nation secures at least one fundamental, energy, food, manufacturing, or technology, it can leverage that advantage to obtain the others. Africa, Asia, and Latin America have plenty of sunlight for solar, wind corridors for turbines, and now the potential for on-site ammonia production. These combined resources can catapult developing regions into economic self-sufficiency. No more being the raw material supplier or the place that buys expensive, often second-hand fossil infrastructure. Now, is that process automatic or easy? Of course not. The fossil fuel industry, with its legacy infrastructure and powerful lobbyists, isn't going to roll out the red carpet for ammonia-based solutions. They might even launch ad campaigns to scare you with ammonia accidents or claim the technology is decades away from feasibility. But the shift is happening whether they like it or not. As soon as small-scale solutions become cheaper than large-scale centralized ones, and we're already there in many cases, market forces and democratic choice will steer us away from the old guard. In short, technology and democracy go hand in hand. When communities can freely choose how to power themselves, and the technology is available at a local scale, big monopolies lose their grip. If that sounds disruptive, it is, and that's the whole point. We're not just talking about an energy transition. We're talking about reshuffling global economic hierarchies in a way that fosters independence, innovation, and equality. That's the real promise behind small-scale ammonia and hydrogen. An age of energy abundance that belongs to everyone, not just a privileged few. The case for small-scale ammonia and hydrogen production. So why go small when giant plants have historically dominated the ammonia scene? For starters, big plants only seem cheap because they never paid the true cost of carbon emissions. The World Bank's analysis on hydrogen shipping hammered this home. They estimated that just sending hydrogen across oceans could cost anywhere from $3 to $9 per kilogram, which is mind-bogglingly expensive in the long run. And that's not counting the cost to produce the hydrogen in the first place. Over at the nh3fuel.com forum, you'll find many references to how ammonia can serve as a low-cost hydrogen carrier, especially if produced on site. Traditional methods revolve around the massive Haber-Bosch process, which demands enormous heat, pressure, and infrastructure. But the game is changing fast. New catalysts and better electrochemical or steam-assisted methods are allowing smaller, localized plants to produce ammonia with 40 to 60% more efficiency than just a decade ago. Greg Vezina, who's been at this for over 40 years, often jokes about the early days when fueling a car with ammonia felt like a scene from a sci-fi movie. But, as you can see in his videos, it's not only possible, it's practical. What used to be a pipe dream reserved for huge industrial sites is now viable in micro or modular form. And once these technologies reach a certain efficiency level, shipping ammonia halfway around the world stops making sense, especially when local production slashes transportation costs and supply chain headaches. Critics of small-scale production argue that it can't compete with the economies of scale in giant plants. But that argument ignores the hidden fees of large projects. Those big ammonia factories require billions of dollars in upfront investment, plus an infrastructure of pipelines, shipping terminals, and storage tanks. When you add in carbon taxes or even a slight penalty for greenhouse emissions, the old advantage shrivels. Meanwhile, small-scale plants don't need massive capital from big banks or mega corporations. They can be funded by local investors, municipalities, or even community cooperatives. That fosters resilience, no single point of failure, no top-heavy bureaucracy. Another advantage is end-use control. Instead of producing ammonia in, say, Western Canada and sending it thousands of miles to South Korea, a local setup can create exactly as much ammonia as needed, right at the destination. Less waste, fewer emissions. That's especially valuable in agriculture, where you can match fertilizer production to the immediate demands of farmland. Farmers no longer have to worry about shipping delays or price spikes due to international disputes. They just tap into their local ammonia supply, reduce shipping overhead, and cut out the middleman. Does this approach eliminate fossil fuels overnight? Of course not. Even as we scale up small ammonia and hydrogen production, natural gas and coal still dominate global markets. But each local success story, like a micro-ammonia project in a farming community or a maritime port shifting to ammonia for fueling ships, chips away at the old fossil foundation. Eventually, as more success stories pile up, investors pivot toward these new technologies, creating a self-reinforcing cycle of innovation and adoption. And let's be real, shipping hydrogen or ammonia internationally isn't always a bad idea. Some regions will still have a comparative advantage in renewable power generation, so they might export excess ammonia to places that can't easily generate their own. But that's a far cry from the monolithic global supply chains we see today, where a handful of companies control fertilizer or energy distribution to entire continents. Instead, we move toward a patchwork of local and regional hubs, each optimized for its resources, connected by flexible trade routes rather than forced dependence. How MAPS 1.0 transforms the market. Hydrofuel Canada's micro-ammonia production system, commonly called MAPS 1.0, is one of the most talked-about small-scale breakthroughs. It takes a process historically bound by enormous plants and shrinks it to a manageable scale. Imagine a setup that could fit into something like a shipping container, churning out enough ammonia for local use. According to official releases and coverage on platforms like nh3fuel.com, MAPS 1.0 represents a revolutionary leap in ammonia technology. Why is it so revolutionary? Because it operates at ambient temperature and pressure, drastically reducing energy consumption. Traditional Haber-Bosch processes demand extremely high temperatures, around 400 to 500 degrees Celsius, and high pressures, up to 200 to 300 bar. That means huge reactors, giant compressors, and a lot of electricity or fossil fuel to keep everything hot and pressurized. MAPS 1.0, however, bypasses much of that with a novel approach to combining hydrogen and nitrogen into ammonia at near-room conditions. Greg Vezina has spoken extensively about how MAPS 1.0 can produce ammonia at a cost comparable to or even cheaper than natural gas-based methods once you factor in even a small carbon tax. The system can generate about 380 tons of ammonia per year, saving around 40% in combined CapEx, OpEx, and financing compared to conventional large-scale plants. That's a big deal if you're a farmer or a local utility seeking an alternative to diesel generators or long-distance trucking of ammonia. MAPS 1.0 can also produce hydrogen simultaneously. That means you can adjust your production ratios based on what's in demand at any given moment. Need more fertilizer? Redirect the output into ammonia. Need hydrogen for a fuel cell application? Tap the other output stream. This flexibility is especially valuable in regions experimenting with microgrids or looking to store surplus renewable energy. Instead of letting wind turbines sit idle on a windy night when nobody needs electricity, you crank out ammonia or hydrogen and store it for later use or sale. The system's footprint is small enough that it can be integrated into existing infrastructure. For instance, farmers who have a steady supply of renewable electricity, maybe a solar array or a small wind farm, could hook it up to a MAPS unit, produce ammonia on site, and drastically cut their reliance on external fertilizer shipments. Over time, that local production can expand, fueling trucks, tractors, or backup generators with ammonia or hydrogen. The savings in transportation and lower carbon emissions could be a critical lifeline for rural economies that struggle with the high cost of diesel or imported energy. Moreover, that reliability factor is huge. We've seen supply chains falter in recent years due to global events, pandemics, or international conflicts. Having a local source of ammonia and hydrogen buffers communities against these disruptions. If a port shuts down or a pipeline breaks, a MAPS-equipped region can keep functioning. Yes, it might not produce enough to replace all imported fertilizer or fuel instantly, but it buys precious time and stability, reducing volatility in local markets. Skeptics sometimes say, this can't possibly scale. But the beauty of modular units is that you can add as many as you need. Want more production? Deploy a second MAPS 1.0 container next to the first. This creates a distributed network of smaller ammonia plants rather than one giant monolithic facility. In a sense, it's like the difference between having one mainframe computer for an entire corporation versus giving everyone personal computers and connecting them via a network. The latter approach fosters resilience and innovation. When new technology emerges, you upgrade or replace a single node, not your entire system. The leap to MAPS 2.0. If MAPS 1.0 is the appetizer, MAPS 2.0 is the main course, taking the next big step by generating its own hydrogen. No need to hook up an external electrolyzer or rely on white hydrogen from natural sources, although you still can. MAPS 2.0 uses a steam-assisted process to split water into hydrogen and oxygen, while also extracting nitrogen from the air. That integrated design boosts overall efficiency to the 50 to 60% range compared to old-school ammonia production. Think about it this way. Ammonia is just NH3. You need nitrogen, N2, and hydrogen, H2. Historically, we got H2 by reforming natural gas or gasifying coal, which produces loads of CO2. With MAPS 2.0, you're not relying on fossil fuels. You're relying on water and a bit of smart engineering. The nitrogen is pulled from ambient air, much like how the Haber-Bosch process does, but without the monstrous energy demands. According to in-depth discussions on the nh3fuel.com forum, MAPS 2.0 could be the first all-in-one system that's truly market-ready. This means smaller communities, businesses, or even city utilities can install a MAPS 2.0 unit and become self-sufficient in both ammonia and hydrogen. Farmers who produce their own hydrogen can run advanced fuel cells or ammonia engines right there on the property. Yes, the technology is new and will likely take time to reach mass adoption. But if you tune into interviews with Vezina, you'll notice an undercurrent of excitement. He often brings up how in the 1970s, running a car on ammonia felt like a wacky experiment. Now it's part of a broader wave of solutions recognized by serious economists and scientists. The same shift is happening with local ammonia plants. They're no longer just science fair projects or PR stunts. They are becoming commercially viable, especially in niche markets where fossil fuel prices are skyrocketing or supply lines are vulnerable. An added plus is that MAPS 2.0's integrated approach cuts out a lot of duplication in infrastructure. You don't need separate modules for hydrogen production, nitrogen separation, and ammonia synthesis. It's all in one streamlined package. That synergy means fewer components, fewer points of failure, and, in principle, a lower overall cost. By slashing complexity, MAPS 2.0 paves the way for faster deployment and simpler maintenance. Could there still be kinks? Absolutely. Every new technology has a learning curve. We might see occasional breakdowns or the need for specialized technicians. But the potential payoff, a robust local supply of carbon-free ammonia and hydrogen, can't be ignored. For developing countries in particular, that might be the difference between waiting for a grid extension that never comes or powering up entire villages using local resources. Safety and infrastructure realities. Here's where things get interesting. Search ammonia accident on YouTube, and you'll see some scary visuals. Chemical leaks, hazmat suits, the works. It's no secret that ammonia is caustic. But the data is more reassuring than you might think. Over the last century, only about 1,000 deaths worldwide have been attributed to ammonia accidents, which is about 10 per year on average. Compare that to the millions who die annually from fossil fuel-related air pollution, as discussed in the BMJ study. Greg Vezina's own demonstrations, like driving a car fueled by ammonia, illustrate that while it's crucial to handle ammonia properly, it's far less explosive than gasoline. Indeed, automotive-grade ammonia systems incorporate safety features like double-walled tanks, specialized hoses, and sensors. Ammonia has a strong odor, too, making leaks easier to detect. That's a huge advantage when you consider the invisible, odorless hazards of natural gas leaks or the catastrophic potential of gasoline vapor explosions. Another piece of the puzzle is that we already have a century's worth of ammonia infrastructure. Fertilizer companies move ammonia around the globe in pipelines, trucks, and ships. The capacity is enormous, and while accidents do happen, they're far less frequent and catastrophic compared to the scale of fossil fuel disasters. There's a well-documented video of a worst-case ammonia release during refrigeration unit testing that underscores ammonia's relatively manageable risk profile. It's dramatic but highlights that with proper handling, casualties can be minimal or non-existent. Now, some folks worry about dedicating existing infrastructure to ammonia or hydrogen, arguing it's not safe or feasible. But multiple studies and real-world practice show we can repurpose certain pipelines and shipping routes for ammonia with only moderate adjustments. For example, natural gas pipelines require special materials to avoid hydrogen embrittlement if you plan to transport pure H2. But shipping ammonia has far fewer of those pitfalls. That's partly why the World Bank concluded ammonia is about 300% more economic for large-scale transport than raw hydrogen. Critics point out that ammonia is still a hazardous chemical that can cause burns and environmental damage if spilled. That's fair, but we should compare it to the alternatives. Coal, oil, and natural gas aren't exactly winning any awards for safety or cleanliness. The question is whether ammonia, with modern safety standards and decades of operational experience, is a net improvement. Based on the data, it clearly is. Carbon pricing and the economic tipping point. Let's talk money, specifically carbon taxes. At $20 per ton of CO2, coal-based ammonia production suddenly looks like an economic dud. Because coal-derived ammonia can emit as much as 4 tons of CO2 per ton of ammonia, that's an extra $80 on the price tag, effectively wiping out any cost advantage coal once had. For hydrogen from coal, the penalty can exceed $400 per ton, enough to make an accountant faint. When you apply even a modest carbon price, small-scale ammonia and hydrogen production methods, like MAPS 1.0 and 2.0, often come out ahead. They either produce zero or minimal CO2, so the carbon tax doesn't eat away their profit margins. The minute you bake in the real cost of pollution, the fossil-based approach starts to look downright outdated. Take natural gas-based ammonia, which emits about 1.6 to 2 tons of CO2 per ton of ammonia. At $20 per ton, you're tacking on an extra $32 to $40 to every ton produced. That might not seem like much if gas prices are low, but gas prices fluctuate wildly. Factor in global events or supply chain issues, and that $20 carbon tax can quickly become $40 or $60. Meanwhile, green ammonia producers remain largely untouched by these spikes. It's not just about the direct carbon tax either. There are also indirect costs, like stricter emission regulations, public pressure, lawsuits for environmental damage, and investor sentiment shifting away from fossil-heavy portfolios. Banks and hedge funds want to put their money where the future is, and that's not in technology likely to be outlawed or penalized a decade from now. As carbon pricing rises, a scenario many experts anticipate, fossil-based processes become less appealing. If governments push carbon prices to $50 or even $100 per ton, which some climate models suggest, the economy for old-school ammonia plants collapses unless they install expensive carbon capture systems. By contrast, ammonia production methods that start with water and air look like a downright bargain. That's why savvy investors and entire nations are eyeing small-scale ammonia systems as a hedge against the uncertain future of fossil fuels. Once the tide of public policy and investment strategy changes, entire industries can shift almost overnight. It happened in the solar industry, where prices plummeted after a decade of government incentives. It can happen for ammonia, too. Already, we're seeing early adopters in maritime shipping, farming cooperatives, and remote communities taking the first steps, lured by stable local production costs immune to fossil price spikes, a new golden age of fertilizer and energy storage. Ammonia isn't just about fueling cars or meeting carbon targets. It's also the bedrock of fertilizer production. Currently, about 200 million tons of ammonia are produced every year. That's a huge chunk of the global economy since modern agriculture depends on ammonia-based fertilizer to keep crop yields high. The downside is that roughly 2% of global CO2 emissions come from ammonia plants running on fossil feedstocks. Replacing even half of that with greener methods would be a climate victory. The cherry on top is that local production could stabilize food supply chains. Instead of relying on a few massive plants in major industrial hubs, farmers can source ammonia from regional microplants. This means less shipping, fewer disruptions, and more price certainty, a big deal in a world where food prices spike at the drop of a hat. Then there's energy storage. Sunlight and wind are intermittent, but ammonia can store energy for months without significant losses. Some folks joke about an ammonia battery, but it's not far from the truth. If you have excess electricity from renewables, you run it through water splitting to get hydrogen, pull nitrogen from the air, and combine them into ammonia. Store the ammonia in tanks, and whenever you need that energy, say during a windless night, crack the ammonia to get hydrogen for a fuel cell or burn it directly in a specialized engine. This is precisely why some researchers claim ammonia is the only viable solution for seasonal energy storage at massive scales. In several videos posted by Greg Vezina, you'll see prototypes of ammonia-powered systems designed to run generators for extended periods. He's not alone in this effort. Numerous universities and startups are trying to perfect ammonia storage for large-scale grid support. The World Bank also acknowledges that ammonia is significantly cheaper to ship than hydrogen, making it a powerful link in the global renewable energy chain. Countries with abundant wind or solar can generate ammonia for domestic use and export the surplus to regions less blessed with sunshine or breeze. This synergy, combining fertilizer production and energy storage into one chemical, positions ammonia as a potential superstar in the clean energy transition. It's not often that a single compound can feed the world and power it too. That double role amplifies the importance of ammonia's safety record. Sure, you don't want spills or leaks, but the industry already knows how to handle large volumes responsibly. Using that knowledge for a new golden age of ammonia might be easier than waiting decades for a brand new hydrogen infrastructure to be built from scratch. And yes, there will be naysayers. Some older engineers are used to giant, centralized ammonia plants and can't imagine a different approach. Others might fixate on ammonia's smell or toxicity. But the direction of research and the flow of venture capital strongly suggests that the next wave in ammonia technology will be decentralized, low-carbon, and integrated with renewable power sources. MAPS 1.0 and 2.0 are just the tip of the iceberg, overcoming criticisms and common misconceptions. Every big shift faces backlash. Remember how people scoffed at electric cars or ridiculed the first mobile phones as overpriced toys? Today, those critics might feel a little sheepish. The same dynamic applies to ammonia as a fuel and small-scale ammonia production. Let's tackle some common misconceptions. Firstly, the notion that ammonia is too dangerous. Sure, it's caustic, but guess what else is dangerous? Gasoline, diesel, natural gas, and pretty much any chemical with high energy content. Ammonia isn't explosive, so that's already a point in its favor. Safety protocols for ammonia transport and handling have existed for decades, with track records that look solid compared to the long, tragic history of fossil fuel accidents. There are a majority that say you can't beat the efficiency of fossil fuels. Old argument, new data. With carbon pricing and improved electrochemical catalysts, green ammonia can compete head-to-head, especially if you consider shipping or storing hydrogen. According to World Bank figures, shipping hydrogen in ammonia form is drastically cheaper than shipping hydrogen as a compressed or liquefied gas. When you add small-scale MAPS technology that avoids massive overhead, fossil fuels start to lose their edge. Many reports state that large-scale ammonia projects are always better. That used to be true under the old cost structure. But shipping alone can run $3 to $9 per kilogram for hydrogen, or about $3 per kilogram for the hydrogen portion in ammonia. If you can produce ammonia locally at under $3 per kilogram, including CapEx, OpEx, and financing, why bother with the extra shipping expense? Big plants aren't necessarily cheaper once you factor in carbon taxes and enormous infrastructure costs. Critics suggest that cracking ammonia back into hydrogen is too expensive. True, it requires energy, but shipping or piping pure hydrogen is no picnic either. It's expensive, requires specialized materials, and leaks can be catastrophic. Ammonia is far denser, and the cracking process is becoming more efficient. Plus, some applications, like direct ammonia fuel cells or ammonia combustion engines, don't require separate hydrogen extraction at all. The last myth to bust is that ammonia can't scale quickly enough. A fair concern, but small-scale modular units like MAPS can be manufactured and distributed in parallel. Each unit is relatively simple and doesn't need the multi-year construction process of a giant factory. Once a production line for microsystems is established, it's like producing any other standardized equipment. Output can ramp up fast. Critics also fret about the reliability of small systems and whether supply chains for catalysts and advanced membranes exist. Yet the same question applied to the early days of solar panel production. Once demand soared, supply chains caught up, and costs dropped precipitously. The ammonia revolution could follow a similar trajectory, especially with widespread interest from developing nations that want energy independence yesterday, not in 2050. Finally, there's the argument that if ammonia was so great, we'd have done it decades ago. In some ways, we did. Many have tested ammonia vehicles for years, but the old cost structure and the absence of a carbon price made fossil fuels artificially cheap. The situation is different now, as climate concerns and economic factors converge. No one's claiming ammonia is a cure-all, but it's emerging as a potent option that addresses multiple crises at once: energy security, carbon emissions, and fertilizer supply. Outro. We're staring down a new era where ammonia isn't just fertilizer. It's a cleaner fuel, energy storage, and a ticket to global energy independence. Pioneers like Greg Vezina and organizations like NH3 Fuel show us how small-scale systems can challenge the fossil status quo, slash costs, and cut carbon. From Greta's awakening to communities worldwide adopting MAPS technologies, the revolution is here. Join us in this journey. Subscribe to our channel for more deep dives on groundbreaking energy solutions, controversies, and success stories. Let's shape a future that's healthier, wealthier, and powered by the clean potential of NH3. See you next time.